بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Moving on with our lessons in Al-Athbāt wal-Fahāris, today we'll finally begin with the practical application of understanding Asanid, and to be more specific, Asanid al-Mutaakhirin. And the method we've decided for this is to begin with our chains up till al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya, Shama'il al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, authored by Imam al-Tirmidhi or compiled by Imam al-Tirmidhi. And we'll begin from the bottom of these chains and we'll make our way up. And in doing so, bi'idhnillah, we're going to cover the chains of Ahl Misr, the chains of the subcontinent, and the chains of Sham, bi'idhnillah. Obviously, there's a lot more chains you can cover. And even the chains in front of us right now are not all the chains. There's just a few chains. Because if we were to cover everything, it'd take too long. And that's also why, in terms of biographies, when we go over the biographies, we're not going to be covering everyone's biography in detail. Certain biographies will cover in detail. Other biographies will give you a source, and you can obviously refer back to that biography by yourself. Just keep one thing in mind, however. And those are the conditions I mentioned in the beginning of the classes with regards to reading history and how you want to understand history. That's important. Another important aspect is that one of the benefits of reading the lives of the earlier mashayikh is to take lessons from it, or to take lessons from their lives. And realistically, whenever you read the lives of these mashayikh, it will encourage you and it will push you forth to understand hadith and to study ahadith as well as other sciences as well. And that's one of the benefits we want to take back from these sciences, bi'idhnillah. So we'll be going through these chains. We'll try to quickly go through the the masmu'at of these mashayikh, as well as their masmu' or their ijazat in Shama'il specifically, because the book at hand over here is a Shama'il. And we'll be covering, or we'll be accessing a lot of books. Obviously, you can't read all these books in one night, but these books are going to be introduced to you, and we're going to access them so as to encourage everyone to actually refer back to these books, inshallah. And that will obviously help us in understanding these chains, as well as understanding the lives of the mashayikh who came before us and their deep connection with knowledge, as well as their teachers. Majority of the chains which we'll be focusing on towards the middle lessons will be the chains from the subcontinent. And the reason behind that is because in Shama'il specifically, the best chains are most likely the chains from the subcontinent. This is also mentioned by Ziyad Tukla, and he write up of his on the chains of Shama'il, that realistically the best chains in the Shama'il are from the subcontinent in terms of the book in its entirety being read, leading up to Imam al-Tirmidhi. There's also very other nice chains we're going to cover as well. But as well, like you'll see, bi'idhnillah, that there's a lot of information. And we can only cover so much. Let's begin, bi'idhnillah. Now, we're going to begin from these chains over here, which is the Misri chain, all the way till the right. And we'll make our way towards the left, bi'idhnillah. And the way we'll do this is we begin from the bottom of the chain, moving up to a certain point. A certain point meaning, for instance, we're going to stop from the right side on Salim bin Muhammad al-Sanhuri. Okay. And then towards all the middle chains, we're going to stop at Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Dahlawi. And then when we reach the left side, once again, we're going to stop at Salim bin Muhammad. Okay, once we've covered this, then we'll come back to the middle. We'll move from Shaykh Abdul Aziz up until around Salim bin Muhammad again. And we'll cover his chain going through his father first, because we don't actually have too much information about this chain. This is just based off of what he's mentioned in the book of his. And then we'll get into the higher chains. And covering the higher chains, what we'll do, bi'idhnillah, is we'll go through the chain of al-Ghaiti first. This is a good chain over here, up until Mizzi onwards. And then we'll come through Zainuddin al-Zakariya's chains as well, bi'idhnillah, who's a teacher of al-Ghaiti. And we'll also cover the main mashayikh who narrate the Shama'il. There's a lot of shuyukh who narrate Shama'il on account of a large majlis they had in around al-Mizzi's time. There was a very large majlis. If You see these three shuyukh over here, Abdullah bin Khalil al-Harastani, al-Ala, okay, al-Zayn Amr ibn Muhammad, etc. These mashayikh, they all read on a lot of shuyukh. So we'll hint at this bi'idhnillah, and we'll give you the sources to refer back to this. And then once we cover the main chain through the middle, we'll come back towards the right, and we'll mention different turuq as well. And all of these will come together at Abu al-Qasim al-Dihqan al-Khalili, who narrates from Abu al-Qasim Ali ibn Ahmad al-Khuza'i, who narrates from al-Haytham bin Kurayb al-Shashi, who narrates from Imam Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi. Now notice over here, like I mentioned to you, that oftentimes towards the top of a chain, you have tafarrud. And I mentioned the reasons for this in the last class. But one thing to keep in mind over here, that the chain for Shama'il is different than the chain of Tirmidhi. Al-Jami' al-Tirmidhi is narrated through different students of al-Tirmidhi, whereas Shama'il is narrated through different students of al-Tirmidhi. This is important to keep in mind. Oftentimes people, they make a mistake. They trace their chains up until al-Shama'il and up until al-Jami' to the same chain. This would be incorrect. If we were being precise, it wouldn't be ideal because the two books are narrated through different chains. Now let's begin now. So on the right side over here, we have Shaykh Muhammad al Attar. Shaykh Muhammad al Attar is currently alive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prolong his life. I'm not sure why I put the death date over there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prolong his life. And bless him. And I myself I've had the opportunity of listening to al-Muwatta, majority of the Muwatta, and the Shama'il in its entirety, except for perhaps 2 lines or so upon Shaykh Muhammad al Attar. He's from Misr, from Egypt, and he's a close student of Muhammad al-Hafiz al-Tijani. Now, al-Hafiz al-Tijani is one of the greatest mustideen of the previous century. And so he has very strong chains, especially in al-Muwatta. So Shaykh al-Attar's chain in al-Muwatta is very special. It's a very special chain in al-Muwatta specifically. And in Shama'il, he also has a good chain on account of the fact that he's heard a portion of the Shama'il, if not the entire Shama'il, upon his teacher al-Hafiz al-Tijani. Now, Tijani, we're not really sure if he's heard the Shama'il and who he's heard the Shama'il upon, but he has ijazah from a very interesting Shaykh, Shaykh Muhammad al-Aquri. You'll notice over here that if you look at the death date or the life of Shaykh Muhammad, you'll notice he lived for a good portion beyond 100 years. He lived quite long, beyond 100 years. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him. And this was really interesting because over there you have 140 years. And even this is, perhaps he lived for 150 years, it's possible. Now, obviously you hear this, you're very taken aback. How did he live for 150 years? So we have to keep in mind over here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless certain people with long lives. This is the reality. And up until today, we have certain mashayikh who are above 100 years. And not only are they above 100 years, they can teach well, they understand well, and they can read well. And they don't even forget their ulum. And this is a miracle, this is a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon these mashayikh. But this, even though it's a rare scenario, it's not like it's entirely far-fetched where it's impossible. You have scenarios where you have people who've reached the age of 130 and they're still teaching, or they're still capable of teaching, and they're still capable of listening to a book. You'll have scenarios where people reach the age of 140 and then they pass away, rahimahumullah. And you'll see a lot of this back home in regions such as Afghanistan, Pakistan. This is actually quite prevalent. It's not quite prevalent in the sense that every other person is like this, of course not, but you'll see quite a bit of this. So don't be quick to assume that this is all incorrect. In fact, this specific Shaykh at hand, Shaykh Muhammad al-Mu'ammar, who lived this. Al-Mu'ammar means he lived a long life. One time he was with a journalist, and the journalist questioned his age. So he went and he got all the birth certificates and everything, and he came and showed him. And he proved to him that at that time he was at least 130 years old. So Shaykh al-Tijani has ijazah from him. You'll notice, obviously, if he's 130 years old, or even older than that, then he has ijazah from mashayikh who were much earlier on. So normally it would take 2 lifespans or 2 people to actually reach, for instance, al-Burhan Ibrahim al-Bajuri. Burhanuddin Ibrahim al-Bajuri is the Sharih of Shama'il. He has a commentary on the Shama'il. Okay, and that's a big name. Muhammad al-Aquri is able to narrate from him directly. Why? On account of the fact that he lived such a long life. But it's through ijazah. Over here we don't have sama'. And obviously I told you previously that we're focusing mostly on sama'. But in the scenario where we don't have sama', we'll look for ijazah amma or ijazah khassa specifically, and then ijazah amma. So Shaykh Muhammad, he has ijazah from al-Burhan Ibrahim al-Bajuri. Al-Burhan Ibrahim al-Bajuri narrates from Muhammad al-Shanawani, who narrates from Isa al-Burawi, who has ijazah from Muhammad al-Difri, who has ijazah from Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. All right. Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri has ijazah from both Ali al-Shabramallisi as well as Isa al-Maghribi, the first of whom narrates from Ibrahim al-Laqani. Ali al-Shabramallisi narrates the entire Shama'il sama'an from Ibrahim al-Laqani. And Ibrahim al-Laqani is a big name because you're going to see him we'll come across him multiple times in the Asanid bi'idhnillah. On the other hand, Abdullah al-Basri, does he narrate sama'an from Isa al-Maghribi or not? There's room for discussion over here. So you'll find in the Thabat in certain Athbāt, Abdullah al-Basri says that Ahmad al-Nakhli is another great sheikh of his time from the Haramain, who he says he was kana shariki fi asatizati. Like we studied by our mashayikh together. So he says all his teachers are my teachers. But over there he uses an interesting wording. He says that all my teachers were his teachers, but the wording he uses seems to indicate that all of what I read, he read as well. Now we know that Ahmad al-Nakhli, over here, Ahmad al-Nakhli read the Shama'il upon Isa al-Tha'alibi al-Maghribi. So if we interpret this to mean that everything he's read upon his teachers, I've also read upon his teachers, and vice versa, that would mean that Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri also read the Shama'il upon Isa bin Muhammad al-Tha'alibi al-Maghribi. But this seems to be a tad bit far-fetched. It's not too clear. Alright? Regardless, Isa al-Maghribi narrates from Sultan bin Ahmad al-Mazzahi. Both Ibrahim al-Laqani and Sultan bin Ahmad al-Mazzahi narrate from Salim bin Muhammad al-Sinhuri. Alright. I told you we're going to stop over here. Now, you'll notice I covered the entire chain in English, but obviously we're going to go into a lot more detail right now, bi'idhnillah. And the way chains are written in the Arabic languages, you begin with your chain, moving up, and then as you continue to mention these chains, you're going to mention where there's sama', you'll mention where you indicate where there's ijazah, and if there's sama' for a portion of the book, you'll indicate that. To be precise, you want to indicate all of this. So we'll begin bi'idhnillah from the right side of the chain as I mentioned to you previously, beginning with Shaykh Muhammad Abdul-Muttalib al Attar. I've already mentioned his chain. What I want to focus on over here is from Burhanuddin al-Bajuri onwards. Okay. Burhanuddin al-Bajuri writes, سمعته على الشيخ محمد علي الشنواني. Now notice over here I said سمعته. This is important. Alright, because I'm establishing sama' over here. Now once I say there's sama', I'm going to have to prove this. I'm going to prove it for you inshallah. سمعت على الشيخ محمد علي الشنواني قال, he said, سمعت على الشيخ عيسى الفارسي عن محمد الدفري عن سالم بن عبد الله البصري عن أبي. Okay. وبإجازته الدفري, he has ijazah directly from Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. So you'll notice over here that Muhammad al-Difri narrates from Salim bin Abdullah al-Basri from his father. Over here there's a person between him and Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. This is a lower chain. But he also narrates through ijazah a higher chain directly from Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. Now why am I mentioning an Salim bin Abdullah if he's narrating the higher chain? The reason I mentioned Salim bin Abdullah is because when we show you the manuscript in which we have mention of the sama', you'll find in that manuscript that the method in which al-Bajuri student has mentioned this chain, it's with Salim bin Abdullah. But if you look into Muhammad al-Difri's Thabat, he has a Thabat of his own. In a Thabat, he mentions that he's taken hadith directly from Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. He doesn't mention which hadith books he's taken. So we can't say that he's taken Shama'il specifically. Had he mentioned Shama'il specifically, it'd be much better, right? Because if he's mentioned Shama'il specifically, it makes things much easier for us. He's taken Shama'il specifically from his teacher. But unfortunately, he didn't mention Shama'il specifically. And if he hasn't mentioned Shama'il specifically, we can't say he's heard the Shama'il specifically upon his teacher, unless we have other qara'in to indicate that. We're going to mention a few qara'in to you later on, bi'idhnillah. Over here, we don't have other qara'in to indicate that. So we just say an. Meaning there's ijazah, he has ijazah from his teacher. Did he hear Shama'il specifically? We can't say for sure. Okay. بإجازته, Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri has ijazah from Abid-Diya Nuruddin Ali al-Shabramallisi. This is a great Shafi'i faqih. And perhaps one of the best biographies you'll find of his is in Ibn al-Ajami's Thabat, which we're going to access soon, bi'idhnillah. We're going to access Ibn al-Ajami's Thabat very soon. And the entire book is amazing, especially the Muqaddimah. And over here, I'll mention to you that I want everyone to actually take out some time to read the Muqaddimah to Ibn al-Ajami's Thabat, which is written by Shaykh Awama, Muhammad Awama has written regarding Ibn al-Ajami, because Tadrib al-Rawi, as you know, Suyuti's book, actually has a hashia written by Ibn al-Ajami. And that was printed by Shaykh Awama. And because he printed that hashia, he also discussed the life of Ibn al-Ajami. So when you cover the hashia of Ibn al-Ajami, of course, you want to know exactly who this person is. So in doing so, Shaykh Awama wrote a biography of his. And along with that biography, he also published a thabat. He also published a thabat, and that thabat is very good. The thabat of Ibn al-Ajami is extremely important, and it has a lot of benefits. All right. Abu Diya Nuruddin Ali Shabramalisi, he says, سمعته كاملا على أبي الإمداد إبراهيم bin Ibrahim al-Laqani, that I heard it directly upon Ibrahim al-Laqani. Where do we understand this from? How do we know that Nuruddin Ali Shabramalisi has heard the entirety of Shama'il directly from al-Laqani? The reason we know this is because Thabat, in the Thabat of Ibn al-Ajami, he is the student of both al-Laqani and Abu Diya Nuruddin. So he mentions in the biography of Shabra al-Malisi that from the books he's heard, one of these books is that he's heard the Shama'il in its entirety upon my teacher, Ibrahim al-Laqani. So over here we've established Sama' through where? Through the Thabat of Ibn al-Ajami. I'm not going to read all the Athbāt for you because a lot of the Athbāt are printed. The Athbāt that are printed, I'm just going to reference them. If there's certain mention of certain narrations in a makhtuta, then we'll quote that makhtuta for you and we'll give you a picture of that manuscript. Otherwise, if the narration is mentioned in a Thabat, which is already printed, then you can access that thabat by yourself. There's no reason for me to actually reference the actual, actually bring out the actual text and read the actual text, unless there's a benefit in it in terms of the biography of a sheikh, for instance. All right. Abu al-Imdad Ibrahim bin Ibrahim al-Laqani, a great Maliki scholar, he actually has a very interesting book. He's written a book on the Ruwat, the narrators of al-Shama'il. He has a book titled Bahjatul Mahafil, وأجمل الوسائل في التعريف بروات الشمائل. Okay, so he's reading the book on the narrators of Shama'il. In that book, towards the beginning, he writes that my teacher, Abu Najah Salim, he read the Shama'il, or I heard the Shama'il upon him multiple times. This is extremely important. I'm going to quote this and actually show you the makhtuta later on as well, bi'idhnillah. All right, this is our first chain. Up until our first chain, we covered up until Salim. And we're going to cover his biography as well soon, bi'idhnillah. Our second chain is going through Shaykh Ahmed Fakhri al-Rifa'i. Shaykh Ahmed is a scholar from Beirut, and I've heard the entirety of Shama'il upon him, alhamdulillah. And he's heard the Shama'il upon many mashayikh. So you're going to find something over here that there are certain mashayikh who are musnideen. What does it mean to be a musnid? You're going to cover the actual terminology in mustalah. Just to make things easy, there are certain mashayikh who've heard the Shama'il upon many teachers, or they've heard certain books upon multiple teachers. The benefit of studying or reading a book upon these teachers is that you read a book upon a single teacher, and he has 10, 20 chains in that book. So Shaykh Ahmad Salih, Shaykh Hamid Akram al-Bukhari, who come later on, bi'idhnillah, Shaykh Safwan Dawoodi, all of these mashayikh, they've heard Shama'il upon 10, 20 teachers. You read upon them once, and you'll get many chains for the Shama'il specifically. The other benefit with certain mashayikh is that certain mashayikh, you just read upon them quickly. So for instance, there's many shuyukh who you read the book upon them for the purpose of sama'. The purpose over there is ulu in terms of your chain. But there's other shuyukh who actually go into detail in explaining that book. So we need to point this out. This is important, right? Because if certain shuyukh are explaining the book, then of course the shaykh upon whom you read a book with full explanation, that lesson is much different than those shuyukh upon whom you read a book within a majlis or two majalis. Shaykh Ahmad Salih himself has done tahqiq of the Shama'il, or he's working on a tahqiq of the Shama'il. And he had access to many manuscripts. And so because he had access to many manuscripts, he'd be quoting different manuscripts, and he'd tell us how different manuscripts reference the same hadith. And this is of a lot of benefit to someone who's involved in understanding manuscripts and perfecting, for instance, the text in Shama'il. Because you have a lot of different taba'at, a lot of different publications, and realistically, a lot of these publications, they have certain mistakes in them. Now, I mentioned to you earlier on that the mashayikh, when they were teaching these books, they would ensure to fix their mistakes. The earlier mashayikh, when they were teaching, they would ensure to fix their these mistakes in their nusakh. And this is something that's been forgotten after our books have been printed, unfortunately. Even as we say this, even though books are printed, there are still mistakes in these books. So if there's still mistakes in these books, obviously we'd be expected to correct these mistakes. And a person who does not correct these mistakes is reading through the book. You have sama' in the book, awesome, but you don't actually understand that there's certain mistakes and certain ruwat. Now, how do you determine what the correct version is? You have to access manuscripts. Which manuscripts mention certain ruwat? How did they mention these ruwat? How did they mention these ahadith? The wording that's used in these ahadith, for instance, what's the correct wording from al-Tirmidhi? All of this is understood and tackled in higher hadith studies. And that's one of the purposes behind this course, to teach you how to understand this, at least get a glimpse of it, and to appreciate the amount of work that goes into understanding a single book of hadith, let alone all of the six al-Kutub al-Sitta and books beyond that as well. فالمهم, what matters over here, when I'm trying to make a point of, is that the Shaykh over here has a tahqiq, or he's working on a tahqiq of the Shama'il. So he has access to a lot of manuscripts. Now, accessing the manuscript is the first step in writing a detailed edition of a book. The second step would be to do takhrij, a heavy takhrij, to look into the shuruh, look into the commentaries, etc., in the hawashi, and have a good understanding of exactly what the text is saying, etc. So when we read upon him, he would pinpoint the difference in nusakh, and this is obviously of a lot of benefit. And in certain areas, he'd also pinpoint, for instance, the way to read certain words, the different meanings of certain words, etc., etc. Ahmed, as I mentioned, narrates from multiple teachers. I've mentioned two teachers over here. He has many teachers from the subcontinent as well, but because we have other teachers from the subcontinent, I've only mentioned his teachers from the Arab worlds over here, or the Arab lands over here. Now, over here we have Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani. Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani is, he passed away recently, rahimahullah, in the year 1444. It's about two or so years ago. And frankly speaking, when he passed away, the level of isnad in the world dropped by a daraja. It dropped by a level. Why? Because Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani is the son of the great Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani, the author of al-Fahāris. And I'd also mentioned that you would refer back to al-Fahāris in order to understand the meaning of thabat and mashakh, etc., etc. So I'm hoping everyone did that. Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani traveled across the globe, gathering very high chains. And he is the master of the science. He's one of the masters of the science. His son, Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani, heard a lot of books upon his father, Abdul-Hayy. Now, Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani, because he heard a lot of these books upon his father, Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani, he was obviously, he had very high chains, and he had very good chains. And if you check, there's a small book written by Ziyad Tukla. It's called Nail al-Amani. So Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani has a small book in which he gathers his chains. And Sheikh Ziyad Tukla's added on a book called Nail al-Amani to that book. And that book, Nail al-Amani, is basically gathering the chains of Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani and all of his teachers. So if you want to go through all of Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani's teachers, that would be a good book to refer back to, Nail al-Amani. Obviously, there's other areas to check his biography as well, but Sheikh Ziyad Tukla was a very close student of Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani, and he's essentially covered everything in his biography, or much of what needs to be covered. And towards the end, he actually gives pictures of a lot of ijazat. He presents pictures of a lot of ijazat. However, keep in mind that, those ijazat are very hard to read for multiple reasons. Number one, the picture isn't too clear. Number two, it's written in like the Moroccan style of writing, Arabic, which is very difficult to read for us folks who aren't used to it. All right. Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani, he himself has sama' from many teachers. So if you want to quickly go through exactly who Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani heard the Shama'il upon, the best way is to go through a book called al-Ijazat al-Hindiyya. There's a book written by a contemporary, al-Ijazat al-Hindiyya. It's a very good book, about 7 volumes, which covers a lot of mashayikh, their tarajim, their biographies, their ijazat, their chains, etc., etc. And so Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani, in this book, he has a biography. This contemporary scholar, I think his name is Sheikh Umar Habib, he has a biography of Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani. And over there, he's mentioned much of his masmu'at. And from those masmu'at, he mentions about 7 or so mashayikh upon whom he's heard the Shama'il. For our purpose, over here, we're going to focus on one sheikh upon whom he's actually heard the Shama'il, which is Abdul-Kabir al-Kattani. Abdul-Kabir al-Kattani is the father of Abdul-Hayy, and he's heard the Shama'il upon him multiple times. Otherwise, he's heard upon many other mashayikh as well. It is difficult to gather them all, and obviously to look into each and every single chain takes quite a bit of time. So we've only mentioned the chain of Abdul-Kabir over here. Abdul-Hayy al-Kattani narrating from Ahmed bin Mahjub al-Rifa'i is through ijaza. He's heard certain stuff upon him, but Shama'il specifically he hasn't heard upon him. So he mentions him, I believe, in the Fiqh al-Fahāris, and he mentions certain books he's heard upon him, but he doesn't mention the Shama'il. Regardless, he has ijazah from him. The reason we took this chain over here because we're still mentioning the chain of Ahl Misr. Shaykh Ahmed bin Mahjub al-Rifa'i is from Azhar. He's one of the greatest scholars of Al-Azhar, and he was a leading Muslim of his time. So if you've heard of Shaykh Muhammad Bakhit al-Muti'i, Shaykh Muhammad Bakhit al-Muti'i is the great scholar of Azhar. He was a Hanafi scholar, very strong usuli, very strong in fiqh. You'll actually find that Ahmed bin Mahjub has given him ijazah. Okay, you'll find a certain manuscript in which you find that he's given him ijazah of Thabat of al-Amir al-Kabir. We'll mention al-Amir al-Kabir shortly, bi'idhnillah. Alright, Abdul Hayy al-Kattani narrates through from Ahmed bin Mahjub al-Rifa'i through ijazah. Now, why am I mentioning this over here? Normally we take the Sama'i chain, right? We're going to mention the Sama' based chain later on. But over here, because I want to focus on the Asanid of Ahl Misr, that's why we took this path. Otherwise, we would mention the Sama' based chain, but because we want to focus on the Asanid of Ahl Misr, that's why we mentioned this path through the Azharis, because Ahmed bin Mahjub is from Al-Azhar. Alright, Ahmed bin Mahjub, he narrates from Ahmed bin Natullah al-Maliki. Okay, he also narrates from others, lakin this is one of his teachers, and we don't know exactly what books he's read upon him, unfortunately, but he has ijazah from him. And he's mentioned this in that same manuscript in which he gave ijazah to Muhammad Bakhit al-Muti'i. Ahmed bin Natullah narrates from al-Amir al-Kabir. Al-Amir al-Kabir is essentially the Musnid of Misr. And majority of the chains of Misr will come back to al-Amir al-Kabir and Muhammad al-Shanawani. These two mashayikh, majority of the chains of Misr will come back to these two. They're the Musnids of Misr. They're the Madar. Notice how Shah Waliullah is the Madar of Ahlul Hind. All the chains of Ahlul Hind go through him. And then from him, his son Shah Ishaq, and then his son Shah Abdul Aziz, and his grandson Shah Ishaq. Majority of the chains of Ahlul Hind go through these mashayikh. So they're the Madar of Ahlul Hind. Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir is the Madar of Ahl Misr. So majority of the chains of the mashayikh of Misr will end up going through Shaykh Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir. And he himself has a thabat. He has a thabat which is printed. Muhammad al-Shanawani also has a thabat. I'm not sure if it's been printed yet. There's a makhtuta. We're going to be quoting the makhtuta shortly, bi'idhnillah. Alright, so with this we've covered Ahmad Salih al-Fakhri, al-Rifa'i's chain going up to Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir. Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir, he's heard the Shama'il upon two shuyukh. He's heard a portion of the Shama'il upon Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Salim al-Hifni, the Shaykh of Azhar. But Shaykh Hifni passed away before he could complete the Shama'il. So he doesn't have Sama' Kamil in Shama'il upon Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Salim al-Hifni. He does have Sama' Kamil upon Ali al-Sa'idi. We'll mention this later, bi'idhnillah. This chain we'll mention later on. Nonetheless, he narrates from Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Salim al-Hifni, who narrates from, we mentioned two shuyukh over here. Now, why am I mentioning two shuyukh? The reason I mentioned two shuyukh over here is because al-Hifni's umda in hadith is al-Dimyati. That's towards the left. Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Dimyati. This is his umda in hadith. And al-Dimyati himself has given ijazah to al-Hifni, but we don't know exactly what al-Hifni read upon al-Dimyati. At the same time, al-Hifni, supposedly, he's read the 6 books of hadith upon Eid bin Ali al-Numrusi. This is a great scholar from the scholars of Egypt, and you'll actually find reference to him in the beginning of al-Awa'il al-Sumbuliyya. In the beginning of al-Awa'il al-Sumbuliyya, over there you'll find reference to Eid bin Ali al-Numrusi, although I believe in the edited editions it's written as al-Burlusi. Burlusi, something along those lines. It's possible it's a tasheef, it's actually Numrusi, and it's also possible that he had 2 attributions. Lakin what's famous is al-Numrusi. Al-Numrusi, towards the end of his life, he came to Medina, he passed away in Medina. But prior to that, Eid bin Ali al-Numrusi is special because he heard al-Kutub al-Sitta, all the 6 books, from beginning till the end, upon Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri is perhaps one of the greatest mashayikh of Mecca, one of the greatest shuyukh of Mecca. And when you read his biographies, whether you read it through Shah Waliullah's works, whether you read it through al-Wajih al-Ahdal, who is al-Wajih al-Ahdal? Unfortunately, we haven't mentioned al-Wajih al-Ahdal in these chains. Al-Wajih al-Ahdal is the madar of Asanid of Ahlul Yaman. The majority of the Asanid of Ahlul Yaman go through al-Wajih al-Ahdal. Right? He's a teacher of al-Imrani, he's a teacher of many mashayikh through whom the chains of Yemen go through. He's also written, uh, not a Thabit per se, but he has two very good books. He has An-Nafis al-Yamani, which is an ijazah for the children of Shawkani, which he's mentioned quite a bit of his masmu'at. Essentially a Thabat. And he has another book which is really good. It's called Barakat al-Dunya wal-Ukhra fil Ijazat al-Kubra. Something along these lines. 2 volumes. Extremely good book. And there's a lot of benefits in there in terms of asanid, etc. And just beyond that as well, other benefits as well. In fact, just a few days ago, I was reading that. He mentions that Hassan al-Ujaymi, we're going to cover who exactly Hassan bin Ali al-Ujaymi is later on. He's a very strong scholar of Mecca. And he's a teacher of um, Abu Tahir al-Kurdi, which we'll also mention later on. So there's a lot of mashayikh we have to mention طبعا. Lakin Hassan al-Ujaymi, he has a very interesting statement. Oftentimes when a person, a student is given ijaza, he is given ijaza بشرط بشرط أهل الحديث. They add in the shart, the condition. Like I'll give him the condition, or I'll give him ijaza with the condition of بشرط المعتبر عند أهل الحديث, with the condition that's relied upon according to the people of the scholars of hadith. You'll find different interpretations of this. Hassan bin Ali al-Ujaymi, he says that قولهم أجزت فلانا بشرطه هو تصحيح المتن وضبط الغريب وإعراب المشكل والتحرز من التحريف والتصحيف وغير ذلك. What does it mean to be given ijazah upon the condition of the people of hadith? What this means is that a person, number one, he reads the matan correctly. Number two, if there's any words that are not so common, number one, two, he does dabt of them. Dabt of them would mean that he reads them correctly. He refers back to the books which actually mention exactly how to read those words. Where does each haraka go? And at the same time, the meaning of those words. Because al-gharib are words that are not too common, right? So they have difficult meanings. Ibn al-Athir, for instance, in An-Nihaya, he has a very good book explaining the gharib words in hadith. He explains the meaning of these words. This is a book which every student of hadith needs to have with him. Because if you don't understand these gharib words, how will you understand hadith? Gharib words are uncommon words. An-Nihaya fi gharib al-hadith wal-Athar will explain to you the meaning of these difficult words. And then he says, وَإِعْرَاب. You have to do i'rab of those difficult areas, because there are certain difficult areas where the i'rab is not clear. And the meaning will change based off of the i'rab. So you have to understand the correct i'rab, and then what does the riwayah dictate? Which i'rab does the riwayah dictate? Sometimes there are multiple methods of i'rab, but there's a specific method which has been passed down in the riwayah. So you have to pinpoint this. And you have to avoid any tahrif and tasheef. Oftentimes narrators, their names can get mixed up. So you have to avoid this. Well, like I mentioned, even today this is the case. In matbu'at we have this. In matbu'at, books that are printed in hadith, oftentimes we'll find mistakes in them. So everyone's taking ijazah, but is this condition really fulfilled? We should really think about this. Now, nonetheless, I was speaking with Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri is the great scholar of Mecca. And he revived the science of hadith, you can say, to a degree. He's one of the mashayikh who revived the science of hadith. And around this time period, Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri's time period, there was a lot of great mashayikh in Mecca. This is what you'll notice, this is interesting, that the chains of Ahl Misr, Ahlul Hind, and Ahlul Yemen. So over here, we're talking about Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir, right? His chains, Shah Waliullah, his chains, and Al-Wajih al-Ahdal, their chains. Some of these chains will actually come back, especially Shah Waliullah. In fact, majority of Shah Waliullah's chains, they will come back to the mashayikh of Al-Haramain al-Sharifain. So they're always going to be narrating from Abu Tahir al-Kurdi. Abu Tahir al-Kurdi was the teacher of Shah Waliullah, who was in Medina. And Shah Waliullah, when he went to Medina, he studied upon Abu Tahir al-Kurdi. And Abu Tahir al-Kurdi, subhanAllah, if you read his ijazah for Shah Waliullah, he praised him a lot. And he referred to him, like he understood the value of Shah Waliullah, the great muhaddith of Hind. Abu Tahir al-Kurdi himself, his father Ibrahim al-Kurdi al-Qurani, was a great sheikh in Mecca, in Medina, right? And he himself Abu Tahir studied from multiple shuyukh, amongst whom there was Hassan bin Ali al-Ujaymi, amongst whom was Ahmad bin Muhammad al-Nakhli, amongst whom was Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. Right? All of these mashayikh are great shuyukh of Mecca and Medina. And Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri is special because Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri has his own edition of al-Bukhari, edition referring to his own nuskha. So you have the Unini edition, which was worked upon by Sharafuddin al-Yunini. Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri took this edition and he added on many more benefits to this edition, to the point that Shaykh Waliullah personally says that his edition became better than al-Yunini's edition. This can be contested, but this is what Shaykh Waliullah mentions. Um, so Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri did this, and at the same time, Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri is the one who revived the recital of Musnad Ahmad. Musnad Ahmad was lost, and you have a lot of, not lost per se, but yani, you can imagine how large of a book Musnad Ahmad is. And books were not printed back in that time. But he gathered all these maqtutah together, and Musnad Ahmad was recited upon him. And that's why many of the mashayikh, they narrate Musnad Ahmad through Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. And I've mentioned to you previously that Shaykh Waliullah has very interesting remarks with regards to what it means to be a hafiz, what it means to have dabt. Right? Where does he mention this? He actually mentions this in the biography of Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. This is why this is a homework. Everyone needs to read the biography of Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. You can use any book you want. I'd suggest using Insan al-Ain. Insan al-Ain is I believe it's written in Farsi or Urdu, I'm not sure, but it's been translated to Arabic, one of Shaykh Waliullah's books. And he mentions the brief biographies of the Mashayikh of the Haramain. And in that, he mentions the biography of Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. So you need to go through the biography because he's a name that will come again and again. Another place you can access his biography is in the beginning of Taqrib, which has been printed by Sheikh Awama. So Ibn Hajar's Taqrib, Taqrib al-Tahdhib, there's actually a hashiyah on it written by Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. And that's been printed with the Taqrib in the edition of Sheikh Awama. Towards the beginning, he writes a biography of Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. All right, so this is a very good scholar. He even has a commentary on Bukhari as well. I don't think it's complete, unfortunately, but he has a commentary on Bukhari as well. As I've mentioned, he narrates from multiple people. Over here, we mentioned Ali Shabram al-Mallisi and Isa al-Maghribi. Okay. That's Abu Abdullah Muhammad bin Salim al-Hifni's pathway through Eid bin Ali, through Abdullah bin Salim. But he also narrates from Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Dimyati. And he said, he's my Umdah in Hadith. And the issue is we don't know exactly which book he narrates from who. But in Eid bin Ali al-Numrusi's ijaza for al-Hifni, in that ijaza, he actually mentions that he's heard portions of al-Kutub al-Sitta upon me. It's possible he's heard the entire Kutub al-Sitta upon him. This is what they normally say, that he's heard the entire Kutub al-Sitta. Had this been a chain from the chains of Ahlul Hind, we could say with confidence that if he's heard the entire Kutub al-Sitta upon his teacher, he's also heard Shama'il. Why? Because we have a qarina when it comes to the chains of Ahlul Hind. And that qarina is that Shama'il was printed with al-Tirmidhi. If you look through the manuscripts and the editions of Ahlul Hind, their books were printed with their Shama'il. Their edition of Shama'il was always printed with Tirmidhi. And therefore the default is, if someone's read al-Jami' al-Tirmidhi upon his teacher, or al-Jami' al-Imam al-Tirmidhi upon his teacher, and he's from Ahlul Hind, you can say with confidence, chances are that he's also read Shama'il upon that teacher. Unless we have a nas stating that he read Shama'il upon another teacher. But chances are, if he's read Tirmidhi, he's also read Shama'il, because the two were taught together traditionally. This is important to keep in mind. That qarina is especially applicable to Ahlul Hind. But unfortunately, we aren't too sure if it's applicable to Ahl Misr as well or not. Because the nuskha of Tirmidhi of Ahl Misr does not have Shama'il with it. By the way, the Sahib al-Nuskha, who had the nuskha of Ahl Misr, is Ahmed bin Mahjub al-Rifa'i. Ahmed bin Mahjub al-Rifa'i, he had a nuskha of Tirmidhi. This nuskha, by the way, was the nuskha that was later on printed by Ahmed Shakir. It's a nuskha that was later on printed by and worked upon by Ahmed Shakir. He worked on quite a bit of that nuskha, but at first he wasn't able to complete the nuskha, unfortunately. Na'am. And then someone else took over after he passed away, rahimahullah. Regardless, the point over here is that had Eid bin Ali al-Numrusi, for instance, been from Ahlul Hind, and al-Hifni been from Ahlul Hind, we could have said with confidence that he's also read the Shama'il upon Eid bin Ali al-Numrusi. But unfortunately, we don't know, did Ahl Misr have a habit of reading Shama'il together with Tirmidhi? It doesn't seem to be the case. Because it doesn't seem to be the case, we can't say with confidence that he read a Shama'il upon him as well. So now it's possibly read it upon him. It's also possibly read it upon Ad-Dimyati, who's his Umdah in Hadith. He refers to him as his Umdah in Hadith. Ad-Dimyati has many teachers. We're going to actually quote his tabat for you, which is in the form of a makhtuta, in which he mentions that he's taken the Shama'il along with Ibn Hajar al-Haytami's commentary from Zainuddin ibn Mustafa. Now this is interesting because Ad-Dimyati later on he traveled to Al-Azhar. He studied in Al-Azhar. But prior to traveling to Al-Azhar, he studied from Zainuddin ibn Mustafa. Okay, Ad-Dimyati. who's his teacher. And one of the books he read upon him was the commentary of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami upon the Shama'il. Zainuddin ibn Mustafa narrates from Sultan bin Ahmed. Now, did he read the Shama'il? We're not too sure. He recites, he narrated qira'at from Sultan bin Ahmed al-Mazzahi. Sultan bin Ahmed al-Mazzahi was a great qari. He was a great muqri. So a lot of the chains of qira go through him. But did he narrate the Shama'il? He has ijazah from him in general. So we said that he narrates from him. But did he narrate Shama'il specifically? We're not too sure. Okay. Now with this, we covered up until Salim bin Muhammad as-Sinhuri. On the other hand, Shaykh Ahmad Salih also narrates from Yaseen al-Fadani. Yaseen al-Fadani has a lot of chains. Musnid of the century, in all honesty, one of the Muslims of the century. A great scholar. And if you read his biography, you'll see that he wasn't just a Musnid. He was very well read in other sciences as well. Oftentimes, you have certain people who aren't too well read in other sciences. They don't have a good understanding of hadith sometimes, in fact. Or they don't have a good understanding of mustalah and other sciences, but they have a lot of chains. So they might be a Musnid, but they're certainly not a muhaddith, not a hafiz, they're not an usuli, they're not a faqih. Yaseen al-Fadani had a good understanding of different sciences as well. If you look at his biography, he's read many different books upon different mashayikh. He's studied them thoroughly. Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani, for instance, even he was a musnid, he wasn't necessarily strong in hadith. And this is why Shaykh Safwan, if you read his Mu'jam al-Shuyukh, if you read Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani's biography in Shaykh Safwan's Mu'jam al-Shuyukh, you'll find something very interesting. He compares Shaykh Yunus al-Jawfari, who's the great muhaddith of India, to Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani. He says that it's very interesting that Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani had all these chains, but in terms of understanding hadith, he was leagues behind Muhammad Yunus al-Jawfari. Whereas Shaykh Yunus al-Jawfari didn't have all these chains. And Shaykh Yunus al-Jawfari would actually regret that he wasn't able to meet and get ijazah from Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani. Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani has a lot of high chains. I mentioned to you that when he passed away, the level of chains dropped by a tabaqah. Because a lot of chains he had which other people didn't have access to. But you have to remember that just because someone's a Muslim does not necessarily mean that they're very strong in hadith. And just because someone's very strong in hadith does not necessarily mean they're a Muslim. This is the reality. So if you get a chance, read Shaykh Abdul-Rahman al-Kattani's biography from Mu'jam al-Shuyukh of Shaykh Safwan. Now, Shaykh Yaseen al-Fadani, if you go through his thabat, he mentions two mashayikh upon whom he's read the Shamal upon multiple mashayikh, but in Bulugh al-Amani they mention two mashayikh, Muhammad Ali al-Maliki and Umar bin Hamdan. Umar bin Hamdan he was one of the Muslims of Mecca. He's one of the greatest muhaddith of Mecca, and you'll find a lot of the mashayikh of Mecca they narrate from him. Muhammad Ali al-Maliki was known as the Saybawi of his time. Saybawi was the great Nahwi, so Muhammad Ali al-Maliki was very strong in Nahwu. And Shaykh Yaseen al-Fadani covered a lot of books upon Muhammad Ali al-Maliki. He was the mufti of the Malikiyya in Mecca after his brother Muhammad Abid passed away, rahimahumullah. Muhammad Ali al-Maliki also has an interesting book. It's called Tahdhib al-Furuq. If you heard of al-Qarafi's al-Furuq on the Qawa'id, it's actually printed with another book called Tahdhib al-Furuq. And Tahdhib al-Furuq is written by none other than Muhammad Ali al-Maliki. So he's also a very strong scholar in many different sciences. Shaykh Yaseen al-Fadani narrates the Shama'il from him. Shaykh Muhammad Ali al-Maliki narrates the Shama'il from Sayyid Abu Bakr Shatta al-Makki. Alright, they used to refer to him as Mustafa Bakri. This was his nickname. Now, when Yaseen al-Fadani gathers the asanid of his teacher Muhammad Ali al-Maliki, one point about Yaseen al-Fadani, by the way, is he's worked on a lot of Athbāt. In terms of someone who's worked on Athbāt from the previous generation, perhaps no one rivals or comes close to Yaseen al-Fadani. He has printed so many thabat from different mashayikh, one of whom was his teacher Shaykh Muhammad Ali al-Maliki. He gathered his chains together and he printed a thabat for him. In that, when he covers Shamal, he mentions Shamal, he says, يُخْبِرُ بِهِ عَنِ السَّيِّد أبي بكر, that he would narrate it from Sayyid Abu Bakr. Now over here, that يُخْبِرُ بِهِ, is it sarih in ijazah or sama'? I'm not too sure. I am not too sure. But obviously he's choosing that chain specifically, but we can't be too sure. Sayyid Abu Bakr, he would narrate from Sayyid Ahmad Zaini Dahlan. This was his umda. And he's even written a small biography of him, but unfortunately he didn't mention what exactly studied by him. Sayyid Ahmad Zaini Dahlan would narrate from Uthman bin Hassan al-Dimyati, who would narrate from Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir, and he would also narrate from Muhammad al-Shanawani. Tamam. The rest of the chain we've already covered up until Salim bin Muhammad. Now we'll stop over here. These are our Misri chains, and we're going to go through, we're going to read through bi'idhnillah some of these chains and some of the ijazat which we've been referencing. All right. I mentioned that Bajuri narrates the Shama'il from two teachers. He's heard the Shama'il upon two teachers. Bajuri. One of them was Sheikh Muhammad al-Shanawani. He's the one we mentioned over here. There's another teacher of his as well, we'll mention later on, bi'idhnillah. Where do we get this from? So there is a nuskha of Shama'il, and that nuskha is written by a student referred to as Atiyah. Atiyah is a student of al-Bajuri. And I told you that one of the places where you expect to find asanid is towards the beginning and end of nusakh. Why? Because this is where you write the tibaq al-sama'. So you write the Shama'il, and towards the beginning or end, he's going to mention his chain. So over here, towards the end of Shama'il, he's mentioned his chain. And he says, هذا سند كاتب الأحرف. This is the sanad of the person who's written this. He mentions his name Atiyah. And he says, قد أجازني شيخي العلامة العمدة الفهامة الشيخ إبراهيم الباجوري بقراءة الشمائل للعلامة الترمذي كما أجازه شيخه وأستاذه القدر العالي مولانا الشيخ الفضالي بعد حضورها عليه. He says that my teacher Al-Bajuri has given me ijaza in this chain. Again, this is how are we establishing the sama' of Al-Bajuri? Through his student. I mentioned this to you in the previous lesson that this is one of the methods in which you establish sama'. His student will say, I heard this book upon my teacher and he heard it upon so and so. So chances are, if he's quoting directly from his teacher, that would mean that his teacher told him of this. Alright? Ibrahim al-Bajuri, he studied and he has ijazah in Shama'il from al-Shaykh al-Fadani. We're going to cover him later, bi'idhnillah. بعد حضورها عليه, after attending Shama'il upon his teacher al-Fadali. وحضرها أيضا, and he also attended the Shama'il upon على شيخنا وشيخ شيخنا الشيخ محمد al-Shanawani, upon our teacher and the teacher of our teacher Muhammad al-Shanawani. So Muhammad al-Shanawani taught both Atiyah and Ibrahim al-Bajuri. And Ibrahim al-Bajuri, over here we understand from this text that he attended the Shama'il وحضرها upon al-Shanawani as well. Shanawani says, قال سمعتها من شيخنا الشيخ محمد الفارسي, that I heard the Shama'il from my teacher Muhammad al-Farisi and Shaykh al-Ushmawi from his teacher al-Ushmawi and his Shaykh al-Basri from his teacher al-Basri. This is one chain which we're going to cover later on. قال, and he also says وسمعتها أيضا, and I also heard the Shama'il from and شيخنا من شيخنا الشيخ عيسى البراوي, from Isa al-Burawi, who narrates from al-Shaykh al-Difri, who narrates from al-Shaykh Salim al-Basri. Notice over here he's mentioned Salim. And I mentioned to you that the reason we're mentioning Salim is because al-Shanawani mentions a Salim al-Basri. Otherwise, Muhammad al-Difri narrates directly from Abdullah bin Salim. If you open the Thabat of Shaykh Abdul Muhammad, you'll find that he narrates hadith directly from Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. But because Shaykh Shanawani mentioned him, you're mentioning him as well. And Walidi is Shaykh Abdullah bin Salim al-Basri. Alright. So this over here, we have the student of al-Bajuri mentioning his teacher Sama' and then mentioning his teacher's teacher Sama'. Do we have a text? Do we have a text in which we have al-Shanawani himself mentioning his Sama'? The answer is yes. Al-Shanawani has a Thabat. Makhtuta is available online. And in that Thabat, I had to actually look for quite a bit. The reason I had to look for quite a bit is because normally when they mention Shama'il, they mention Shama'il with Tirmidhi. But different mashayikh have different methods and different places in which they mention Shama'il. Certain mashayikh will mention the books of hadith first, and they'll have a certain section for books of Sirah and Shama'il. And over there, they'll mention Shama'il with Tirmidhi. They won't mention Shama'il with Tirmidhi itself, with Jami' al-Tirmidhi itself. They'll mention Shama'il later on. Interestingly, Shanawani, the last book he mentions before mentioning his Musalsalat is Shama'il. So you have to go through the entire book to actually reach Shama'il al-Tirmidhi. He says, وَأَمَّا الشَّمَائِلِ التِّرْمِذِي سمعتها من شيخنا العلامة الشيخ محمد الفارسي وسمعتها أيضا من شيخنا العلامة الشيخ عيسى البراوي عن شيخ الدفري عن سالم البصري عن والده بسنده إلى الشهاب الرملي عن الشيخ زكريا. And he mentions عن العز بن الفرات بتمام سند الجامع السابق. Now over here, notice he says بتمام سند الجامع السابق, with the previous chain of al-Jami', referring to the chain of al-Jami' al-Tirmidhi. I've mentioned to you that certain Athbāt do this. Certain Athbāt, when they mention the chain of Shama'il, instead of mentioning the entire chain, they just say with the previous chain of al-Jami' al-Tirmidhi. But that's not too accurate. Why is it not accurate? It's not accurate because of the fact that the chain of al-Jami' al-Tirmidhi is different than the chain of Shama'il. So you have to be aware of this. Even Al-Amir al-Kabir has done this in his Thabat as well. So be aware of this. They may be doing this for the purpose of ikhtisar, but the chains are actually different. Alright. We mentioned to you that Al-Budayri, Al-Dimyati, who's a teacher of Muhammad bin Salim al-Hifni. When he narrates the Shama'il, I said that he narrates the Shama'il through his teacher Zainuddin bin Mustafa. All right, al-Dimyati. Now, interestingly, when he mentions the books of hadith, al-Dimyati himself, right? Al-Dimyati himself, when he mentions the books of hadith, who is al-Dimyati? Dimyati is over here. Not Uthman bin Hassan, this is the different Dimyati. Muhammad bin Ahmad. This Dimyati over here. When he mentions the books of hadith, he mentions the books of hadith through different chains. But Shama'il, specifically, if you read through his Thabat, notice this is towards the end of the Thabat again, right? It's not towards the beginning. Why? Because he actually didn't mention Shama'il in the beginning. What he does with Shama'il is, he doesn't mention Shama'il specifically, when I remember. But he mentions the Tasanif of al-Shihab Ahmad bin Hajar al-Haytami. He says, I'm going to mention my chains going up to Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. Over there, he mentions Sharh al-Shama'il. So if he's reading Sharh al-Shama'il, obviously Shama'il is also being read with it, right? And he says, أرويه قراءة عن الشيخ زين الدين المتقدم ذكره. Shaykh Zainuddin we've already mentioned. Shaykh Zainuddin is his first teacher, one of his first teachers. And his Shaykh Sultan with his chain to Ahmad bin Hajar al-Haytami. And then he contrasts this. He contrasts this specific chain with, he says, وأروي جميع مصنفاته عن الشهاب أحمد بن عبد اللطيف عن العلامة محمد البابلي عن الشيخ أحمد السنهوري عن الشيخ أحمد bin Hajar. He says, all the other narrations of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, I narrate through this different chain. So for the chain of Sharh al-Shama'il specifically, he mentioned qira'atan upon Shaykh Zainuddin. And the other books, he says, I narrate them to a different chain. So what that tells us is that he has sama' in Shama'il and Sharh al-Shama'il upon this specific teacher, whereas the other books he narrates through ijaza. That's why he differentiated between the two. And I told you this is towards the end of the book. You won't find this in the beginning of his Thabat. Which is a very good Thabat, by the way. He has a very interesting Thabat. Even al-Kattani in Fihris praises it quite a bit. Now, and in fact, it's possible, if I remember correctly, it's possible that al-Kattani mentions, you can double check this, that Muhammad al-Amir al-Kabir actually summarized his Thabat from Muhammad bin Ahmad bin Yati Thabat. I think that he mentions this. I can't exactly recall. All right. With this, we've covered the asanid of Ahl Misr up until Salim or Sultan bin Ahmad al-Mazzahi. And I will just read a short biography of Sultan bin Ahmad al-Mazzahi, who is a teacher of Ibn al-Ajami. That's where you find mention of him in the Thabat of Ibn al-Ajami. He says over here, لازمته أيضا مدة مديدة أكثر من 40 سنة. That I studied by him for more than 40 years. I want you to think about this. Today, a student will study by a teacher for 5 years, 6 years, and they'll say, you know what? I probably know more than him. I studied by other teachers. This student, Ibn al-Ajami, spent 40 years with al-Mazzahi. And when you read the biography of Ibn al-Ajami and his Thabat, you'll find that this is not just al-Mazzahi. He did mulazim of multiple teachers of his. He was always coming back to their lessons. He was always studying by them. He was always reading upon them. And this is the actual method of scholarship. In order to attain true scholarship, it's not sufficient to read books. It's not enough to simply read books. This is obviously there. You have to read books. That's necessary. That's a given. But along with this, you need mulazimah of a shaykh. You need mulazimah of a shaykh where you go with him to his house, you read upon him, you're free with him, you walk with him, you spend his free time with him. This mulazimah needs to be there for many years on end. And once this mulazimah is there, then you'll understand the true benefit of scholarship. So he over here, he mentions that I studied upon him for 40 years. And he mentions his sama'at upon his teacher. What we want to focus on over here is later on he actually mentions the masmu'at of his teacher, al-Mazzahi. He says, قال شيخنا, he said, our teacher, my teacher, he says that وقرأت صحيح البخاري على الإمام شهاب الدين ابن خليل السبكي. That my teacher said that I read the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari upon my teacher, Shihabuddin ibn Khalil al-Subki. Now, this is important because the chain of al-Bukhari, which is muttasil bis-sama', goes through this teacher. So in order to reach the chain of Bukhari, which is muttasil bis-sama', we actually have to go through Sultan al-Mazzahi. Not just that, وَقَرَأْتُ عَلَيْهِ الْمُوَطَّى لِلْإِمَامِ مَالِكِ. Likewise, the chain of Muwatta, which is muttasil, also goes through this exact teacher. Sultan al-Mazzahi, and Ibn Khalil al-Subki. So where do you find this ma'luma? Over here in the biography of al-Mazzahi, as mentioned by Ibn Ajmi. Notice he's quoting his Shaykh. This is direct. The Shaykh himself is directly mentioning this. Now Shama'il, as he mentioned over here, he says that I read the Arba'in Nawawiyya upon him. I read Al-Ghazali's Minhaj al-Abidin. I read a good portion of Sahih Muslim and a portion from all other 6 books. And he'll also mention Tahawi. Very interesting. Okay. And I have ijazah from him from all of his marwiyat. There's ijazah amma as well. Has he mentioned Shama'il? No. He doesn't actually read, he hasn't read Shama'il upon Ibn Khalil al-Subki, according to this, what he's mentioning over here. But then he says, وَكَذَا قَرَأْتُ عَلِي Shaykh Salih al-Sanhuri, that I read, what upon Shaykh Salih al-Sanhuri? I read, وَحَضَرْتُهُ فِي الْبُخَارِ, I attended his lessons in Bukhari, ومسلم, in Muslim, والشفاء, in الشفاء بالقاضي عياض, الجامع الصغير of Suyuti, والشمائل. Over here we learned that Shama'il, Shaykh Sultan al-Mazzahi narrates from Shaykh Salim al-Sanhuri. مع الإجازة العامة, along with إجازة عامة, with all of his narrations. And then he mentions his other teachers as well. As I mentioned, we can't go through every biography in detail, but you'll get a basic understanding of some of these, the greatest musnideen, as well as their lives bi'idhnillah. If you spend time reading their lives bi'idhnillah, which you will, you'll learn quite a bit, inshallah. You will learn quite a bit, and you'll begin to appreciate the work they've done for their religion and for preserving the religion. And with this, we cover our lesson. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.